I accidentally saw my husband's texts with my best friend. There were 2,000 photos and messages inside. I quietly put down his phone and set the table for 3 when she came for dinner. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always say you never really know someone until something breaks. I used to think that was just something people said. The kind of line you see stitched on a throw pillow at a craft fair, comforting and vague enough to mean nothing. Now I know it's the truest thing I've ever heard. My name is Laura Haynes, 36 years old, mortgage in my name, car note in both our names, a rescue dog named Biscuit who slept at the foot of the bed, and, as it turned out, was a better judge of character than I ever was. For 11 years, I was married to Daniel Haynes, architect, Sunday morning pancake maker, the man who once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm because I'd called him crying after my mother's diagnosis. I believed in him the way you believe in the floor beneath your feet. You don't think about it. You just walk. Christy Marsh had been my best friend since college. 14 years. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. She held my hand in the hospital waiting room when my mother had her surgery. She knew the PIN to my phone, the name of my therapist, the exact shade of humiliation I felt when I miscarried at 11 weeks and didn't know how to tell anyone. She was, I genuinely believed, the safest person in my world outside of Daniel. That's the thing about betrayal. It needs proximity to work. The first signal came in February, about 8 months before everything broke open. Daniel had always been easy with his phone. Left it on the counter, on the coffee table, face up. Men who have nothing to hide don't think about their phones. Then one evening, I reached across the kitchen island to check the time and he moved it. Fast, casual, like it was nothing. He said he was waiting for a work call. I believed him, because that's what I did. In March, Christy canceled our standing Thursday lunch. Work conflict, she said. The following week, the same. I noticed she'd stopped tagging me in things on Instagram. Small, the kind of thing you dismiss as overthinking. But something had shifted in the texture of our friendship, some frequency I couldn't quite name. She laughed a little too quickly when I mentioned Daniel. She stopped asking how things were between us. By April, Daniel had started going to the gym at 6 in the morning. Daniel, who had never in 11 years of marriage voluntarily woken before 7:30 on a weekday. He bought new cologne. I told myself he was having a midlife moment. I told myself a lot of things. The night it happened was a Wednesday in early May. Daniel was in the shower. His phone was on the nightstand, screen down, which he never used to do, and it buzzed 3 times in a row, which meant a message thread, which meant someone was talking fast about something. I told myself not to look. I picked it up. The notification preview showed Christy's name and the first line of a message I won't repeat here. My thumb unlocked the screen before I had consciously decided to do it. I opened the thread. 2,112 messages, photos, voice memos, timestamps going back 11 months. I stood there in my own bedroom, in the house I'd helped pay for, in the life I thought I understood, and I read just enough to know everything. Then I put the phone back exactly where it had been, screen down, and I walked to the kitchen. I don't know why I did what I did next. Shock, maybe, or something quieter and more deliberate than shock. Some survival instinct that said, "Not yet." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I opened the refrigerator, took out the pasta I'd made that afternoon, and I set the table for 3. Christy was coming for dinner at 7. She'd confirmed that morning with a string of heart emojis. Daniel came downstairs in his clean shirt, smelling of the new cologne. He kissed my cheek. "Smells amazing," he said. "Thanks," I said. "Christy should be here in 20 minutes." I watched his face. He didn't flinch. He went to the wine rack and picked a bottle the way he always did, turning it over in his hands, reading the label. My husband in my kitchen, choosing wine to share with the woman he'd been sleeping with for nearly a year, while I folded napkins and kept my breathing slow. She arrived at 7:04. She hugged me at the door. She smelled like her perfume, the one I'd helped her pick out 2 years ago at Nordstrom on a rainy Saturday afternoon. "You look great," she said. "So do you," I said, and I meant it, in the cold, clinical way that you mean something when every warm feeling has been replaced by pure, quiet observation. We sat down. I poured the wine. I asked about her job, her sister, the vacation she was planning. I listened. I smiled in the right places. Daniel talked too much, the way people do when they're nervous, and I cataloged every word. Dinner lasted 93 minutes. I counted. When she left, she hugged me again at the door. "Same time next week?" she said. "Absolutely," I said. I closed the door. I washed the dishes. I went to bed. And lying there in the dark, listening to Daniel's breathing slow into sleep beside me, I made a decision that would take everything I had and give me back something better. I gave myself exactly 48 hours to fall apart. That's not a figure of speech. I made a deliberate decision the morning after that dinner that I was allowed 2 days, and only 2 days, to grieve in private before I had to start thinking clearly. Some people would say that's cold. I'd say it's the only reason I survived what came next with anything intact. I called in sick to the design firm where I worked as a project manager. I sent a short, professional email, headache, likely migraine, back tomorrow, and then I sat on the floor of the guest bathroom, the one Daniel never used, and I let myself feel all of it at once. The math of what I was losing was staggering, not just the marriage, though that was its own particular landslide, but the architecture of my entire adult life. Daniel and I owned the house jointly, but I had put in 60% of the down payment from money I'd inherited when my grandmother died. We had 2 joint accounts, and one investment account I'd contributed to more substantially because I'd made more money for the first 6 years of our marriage, before Daniel's firm took off. We had biscuit, we had couple friends, we had Christmas traditions and a shared storage unit and a standing reservation at a restaurant we went to every anniversary. And Christy. God. I kept coming back to Christy. She knew where I was most vulnerable. She knew about the miscarriage, the depression that followed it, the 6 months I spent in therapy trying to hold my marriage together after that loss. She knew I'd once told Daniel that if he ever cheated on me, I would leave without a second conversation. And she would have repeated that to him, used it maybe to keep him scared of telling me the truth. She had been inside my life with a set of keys I'd handed her myself. By hour 30, the grief had started to organize itself into something more useful, clarity. I was afraid. I want to be honest about that. I was afraid of the legal process, of what it would cost, of how people would look at me. I was afraid of being the woman whose husband left her for her best friend, that particular flavor of public humiliation. I was afraid of being alone at 36 with a mortgage and a dog and a hollow place where my closest friendship used to be. I was afraid that if I confronted Daniel too soon, he would lawyer up immediately and drain our joint accounts before I could do anything about it. That last fear was the one that moved me. I stopped crying sometime around noon on the second day. I got off the bathroom floor. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and I started writing. The first thing I wrote was a question. What do I actually need to do, and in what order? Here is what I understood about my situation. I could not afford to act on emotion. Every impulsive move I made, confronting Daniel, calling Christy, posting anything on social media, telling mutual friends, would be a card I couldn't take back. In a divorce proceeding, documented behavior matters. Timing matters. Who initiates? What's been said? What's been done? I had watched my cousin Michelle go through a brutal divorce 4 years earlier and lose half of what she'd built because she'd sent 3 furious text messages in the first week that her husband's attorney used to paint her as unstable. I was not going to be Michelle. My first plan was simple and had 3 parts. Part 1, protect the money. I needed to speak to a divorce attorney before Daniel had any idea what was coming. Not to file immediately, but to understand exactly what I was entitled to, what actions I could legally take, and which accounts I could move funds from without triggering anything that could be used against me. I knew enough to know I didn't know enough. Part 2, document everything. The messages I'd seen were on Daniel's phone, which I no longer had access to. But 11 months of an affair doesn't stay only on a phone. There would be credit card statements, dinners, hotels, gifts. There would be his calendar. There would possibly be things Christy had said to mutual friends, to her sister, that could be corroborated. Part 3, hold the line in public. I could not let either of them know that I knew. Not yet. The dinner had proven I could do it. I'd sat across from both of them for 93 minutes and given nothing away. I needed to keep doing exactly that while I built the foundation of what came next. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and searched for family law attorneys in our county. I was looking specifically for someone who specialized in high-asset divorce cases, who had strong reviews, and who was, ideally, not someone Daniel's firm had ever done business with. I found her on the 4th search result. Her name was Patricia Elwood, and her firm's tagline was quiet but precise: protecting what you built. I sent a contact form inquiry from my work email, not the joint Gmail account Daniel could access, and requested an initial consultation at the earliest availability. Then I closed the laptop, freshened biscuits water, and started making dinner. Daniel would be home in 2 hours. The version of me he was going to see tonight was the same version he'd seen for the past 8 months. His wife, calm and warm, the woman who had no idea. I was a very good actress. I just hadn't known it yet. Patricia Elwood's office was in a quiet commercial building 12 minutes from my workplace, close enough to reach on a lunch break, far enough from our neighborhood that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I'd chosen a Tuesday when Daniel had a standing project meeting that ran till 2. I told my assistant I had a dentist appointment. The office was deliberately calm, no harsh lighting, no imposing furniture. Patricia herself was a woman in her early 50s with close-cropped gray hair and the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades listening to people describe the worst moments of their lives without letting it move her face. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. Then she asked me 6 questions in precise order and wrote down my answers in a yellow legal pad. Afterward, she set her pen down and said, "You've done the smart thing by coming before you've said anything to him. A lot of people don't." She explained my position. Because I had contributed more substantially to the down payment and to the early years of joint investment, I had a documentable claim that the marital estate was not an equal split. Georgia was an equitable distribution state, not a 50-50 state. What that meant was that the court would look at contributions, circumstances, and conduct. Conduct, she explained, included adultery. Adultery in Georgia, she said, is still grounds for divorce, and it's relevant to asset distribution. If you can document the affair, and I mean properly, not just what you saw on his phone, it strengthens your position. She told me what I could legally do. I could withdraw up to half of any joint account without his consent, provided I did not exceed half. I could not drain them. I could not hide assets. But I could, quietly, move money to a separate account, which I should open immediately in my name only at a bank we did not jointly use. She recommended I do it before the end of the week. She also told me what I could not do. I could not access his phone without his consent, could not install tracking software, could not record conversations without informing him in a two-party consent state. Georgia, she clarified, was a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations I was personally part of. I filed that information quietly and completely. I left her office with a folder of intake documents, a retainer invoice I paid with my personal savings card, and a list of 3 things to do before our next meeting. The first thing I did was open a new checking account at a credit union across town, that same afternoon during my actual lunch break. The second thing happened by accident. I had given my work email to Patricia, and I'd been careful about keeping our communications off any shared devices. But in the process of moving some old files off our shared family computer one evening, something I'd been meaning to do for months, I found a folder Daniel had named, with characteristic lack of imagination, Project Notes 2023. I almost skipped it. I'd seen it before and assumed it was exactly what it said. I opened it. It was a folder of screenshots, hotel confirmation emails forwarded to himself from what I recognized as a secondary email address I hadn't known existed. Dinner reservations. In April, a reservation at Maison Blanc, the restaurant we went to every anniversary. He had taken her there. He had taken Christy to our anniversary restaurant 2 weeks before our actual anniversary, which he had also celebrated with me, at the same table where he'd given me a card that said 11 years and still falling. I sat very still for a long time. Then I inserted a thumb drive and copied the entire folder. That was the point of no return. Not the phone. I couldn't use that. I hadn't meant to see it. But this folder was on a shared family computer, in a shared directory. Patricia would tell me later that this was clean, usable, admissible. He had left it there, in our shared space, behind a label designed to look like nothing. Now, about Christy and Daniel, they had, by this point, started to feel something shift. I noticed it first with Christy. We had coffee the following Saturday, our usual place, and she was different in a way I had to concentrate to define. Watchful. She asked me twice how Daniel and I were doing, which she had never done before. She'd always taken us as a given, an unchanging backdrop. Now she wanted data. "We're good," I said, with the warmth of someone who had nothing to report. "He's been really busy with the Keller project. You know how he gets." She nodded. She looked at her coffee cup. Daniel, for his part, had started being kind, aggressively, transparently kind, picking up dinner without being asked, offering to handle Biscuit's vet appointment, touching my shoulder when he passed me in the kitchen. Guilt does one of 2 things to people. It makes them cold and distant, or it makes them desperate and compensatory. Daniel was a compensator. He was trying to fill a gap I was pretending not to notice. 3 days after I found the folder, I met with Patricia again. I brought the thumb drive. She looked through the files carefully. She said, "This is a good start. Is there anything else on that computer?" I told her I'd look again. She told me our next step. I needed to make a complete, organized record, dates, locations, anything I could document without violating his privacy illegally. She also recommended that I quietly consult with a forensic accountant because 11 months of a second life cost money, and that money had come from somewhere. I drove home with the folder of instructions on the passenger seat and a feeling in my chest that was not quite anger and not quite grief. It was something more purposeful than either. It was the feeling of a door closing behind you and choosing very deliberately to face forward. The forensic accountant Patricia recommended was a man named Gerald Shue, who worked out of a small office near the courthouse and spoke almost exclusively in numbers. He charged $400 an hour and was, Patricia had warned me, worth every cent. I met with him on a Thursday morning, having told Daniel I was meeting a client. I brought what I had, joint bank statements printed from our online account, which I had every legal right to access, credit card statements for the card we shared, the timeline I'd built from the hotel screenshots. Gerald looked at all of it for 45 minutes without speaking, organized it into 3 columns on his legal pad, and then said, "There's approximately $19,000 unaccounted for in the past 11 months. Could be cash withdrawals. Could be a secondary card. We'll need to subpoena his individual statements." $19,000. I thought about the new cologne. By the time Gerald and I finished, it was past noon. I was walking back to my car when my phone rang. It was Christy. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought, data. "Hey," I said, with the warmth of someone who had nothing to hide. "Hey." Her voice was careful, calibrated. "I was just calling to check in. You've seemed a little quiet lately." "Work's been intense," I said. "The Harmon project is eating me alive." "Right." A pause. "Daniel mentioned you've been stressed." I stopped walking. Daniel had called her, or she had called him. They had discussed me. They had looked at me from the outside and taken each other's temperature about what I knew, and the call I was now on was reconnaissance. "Did he?" I said pleasantly. "He worries too much." "He loves you," she said, and the audacity of it, the specific construction of that sentence delivered by her, was so complete that I had to press my thumbnail hard into my palm to keep my voice even. "I know he does," I said. "Hey, I'm just getting to my car. Can I call you tonight?" She said yes. I never called. The confrontation I had been preparing for came sooner than I'd planned. It was a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after my second meeting with Patricia. Daniel and I were in the kitchen. The ordinary geography of a Sunday, coffee going, biscuit asleep in the sun, when Daniel set down his mug and said, with a quietness that told me he'd rehearsed it, "Is everything okay with us?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You've just been, I don't know, somewhere else." "I've had a lot on my mind," I said. "Work stuff. You know how it is." He nodded, but he didn't look reassured. He looked like a man trying to read a document in a language he used to speak, but had mostly forgotten. That evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from a man who identified himself as a friend of Daniel's, Marcus, whom I'd met twice at firm parties. He said, pleasantly, that he'd been talking to Daniel and that Daniel was worried about some things going on, and that he hoped everyone could handle things like adults without getting lawyers involved. He knew. I didn't call Marcus back. I forwarded the voicemail to Patricia. The next day, Daniel came home early and asked me directly, not about the affair, not yet, but about Patricia. Someone at the county courthouse had mentioned in passing that they'd seen me going into her building. Small towns have long memories, even when they're suburbs. "I was looking into some legal questions," I said calmly, "about my grandmother's estate, some things my cousin brought up." He looked at me for a long moment. "You could have told me." "I didn't think it was urgent," I said. He backed down. But that night, I checked our joint account and found he had moved $15,000 to an account I didn't recognize. I screenshotted the transfer record immediately and sent it to Patricia. She filed an emergency motion for financial restraints the following morning. The motion froze both joint accounts and required full disclosure of all marital assets. Daniel received the paperwork at his office. He came home that evening with a look on his face I had never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something humiliated and afraid. The look of a man who had miscalculated badly and knew it. He said, "You want to tell me what this is?" "I think the paperwork is fairly self-explanatory," I said. He sat down. For the first time in 11 years, I watched my husband have absolutely nothing to say. The following 3 days were very quiet. He moved to the guest room without being asked. Christy sent me a text. "Hey, are you doing okay? Heard you and Daniel are going through something." I read it and did not respond. I took those 3 days for myself. I slept more than I had in weeks. I took Biscuit on long walks in the park where the dogwoods were just beginning to come in, white and extravagant against the gray April sky. I ate well. I called my sister in Phoenix and told her for the first time what was happening. She cried. I didn't. I was not numb. I want to be clear about that. I could feel everything. The grief, the fury, the particular loneliness of sleeping in a bed that had always belonged to the life I thought I had. But I had stopped letting those feelings drive. They were passengers now. I was the one behind the wheel. The first attempt came from Daniel. He knocked on the bedroom door on the 4th morning after the restraining order on the accounts. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, the way he used to when we first lived together, in that small apartment in Midtown before we bought the house. He'd remembered how I take it. He looked tired in a genuine, stripped-down way, and for a moment I felt the old reflex, that decade-deep instinct to close the distance, to take the cup, to let things smooth over. I let the feeling pass through me like weather. "I don't want it to be like this," he said. "Like what?" I asked, genuinely curious about which version of this he was going to offer me. "Lawyers, courts, all of it." He set the second cup on the dresser. "We could talk, work something out between us. We were together for 11 years, Laura. We don't have to let strangers take that apart." I looked at him. He was telling me that if I dropped the legal proceedings, we could have an adult conversation. What he meant was, if I dropped the legal proceedings, he would have more room to maneuver. He would be in a better position. Patricia had told me this exact speech was coming and what it was designed to do. "I'm happy to talk," I said. "My attorney can be in touch with yours about the parameters." He left the coffee cup on the dresser. He took his own cup and went back downstairs. The second attempt came from Christy the following weekend. She texted on Saturday morning, "I know something is going on. I need you to know that you matter to me more than anything. Can we please talk?" I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and made eggs. She texted again 3 hours later, "Laura, please. I'm scared you're going to do something you can't take back based on. I just think we need to talk before things go too far. Based on..." and then nothing. She had started a sentence she knew better than to finish in writing. I showed it to Patricia on Monday. Patricia looked at it for a moment and said, "She's fishing. She wants to know what you have." She paused. "Do not respond." I didn't respond. Daniel, in those days, was present in the house in the manner of a man waiting for a verdict. He was quiet, non-confrontational, distantly polite. He made his own meals, kept to the guest room, walked Biscuit on alternate mornings. It was the most orderly our shared space had ever been, and somehow that orderliness was its own particular grief. Meanwhile, I was building something else. My sister Amanda flew in from Phoenix for a long weekend. She was 4 years older than me and had the quality of being entirely uninterested in what people thought of her, which I had always envied and now found desperately useful. She stayed in the guest room, which meant Daniel moved to the basement on an air mattress, which he did without complaint, which told me everything about where his guilt currently sat. Amanda and I stayed up past midnight 2 nights in a row at the kitchen table, with wine and the kind of conversation you can only have with someone who has known you your whole life. She told me things I needed to hear. She also told me things that were hard, that she'd had doubts about Christy once, years ago, that she'd never said because she didn't want to create problems. I stored that information somewhere and let it do its quiet work. At her suggestion, I also reached out to my therapist, the same one I'd seen after the miscarriage. Her name was Dr. Sandra Price, and she had a soft office and an absolute gift for helping you locate the thing you were actually feeling beneath the thing you thought you were feeling. I had stopped seeing her 2 years ago. She fit me in within a week. "It sounds like you've been managing this alone with extraordinary composure," she said in our first session back, after I'd laid out the facts. "Is that a concern?" I asked. "It's an observation," she said. "I want to make sure the composure is sustainable. What happens when the adrenaline stops?" I thought about the dogwoods in the park, about sleeping 10 hours and waking up not knowing for half a second and then knowing again, about the way Biscuit slept pressed against my knees. "I think I'll cry a lot," I said. "I think that's appropriate." She nodded. "Yes," she said, "it is." Beyond Amanda and Dr. Price, there was one other person who stepped forward in those weeks, my colleague Jess, who had the next office over at the firm. I hadn't planned to tell her anything, but she had asked the right question at the right moment. "Are you actually okay, or are you just saying you are?" And I had told her the outline. She responded with a practicality that I found more comforting than sympathy. She quietly shifted her lunch schedule to match mine for the next several weeks, brought me coffee on mornings when she could see I hadn't slept, and didn't ask questions I hadn't offered to answer. She also mentioned, with the precision of someone who had been through something similar, that her sister-in-law was a real estate attorney who had handled divorce asset cases. She offered to make an introduction. I noted it and filed it away. By the end of those weeks, Daniel and Christy had grown very still. They were watching. They were trying to read the situation without enough information, and the uncertainty was, I think, beginning to be its own form of pressure. I understood something then that I hadn't understood before. I had spent most of my adult life being readable, warm, open, communicative, all the things a good wife and a good friend are supposed to be. All the things that had made it easy for two people to study me and know exactly how much room they had. They were learning now what happens when I close the book. They came on a Saturday. I didn't know they were coming together. Christy had texted the night before saying she needed to see me, that she was sorry, that she just wanted to talk. I had not responded. I was sitting on the back porch with Biscuit when I heard a car in the driveway. And then, a moment later, 2 doors, not one. I knew before I turned around. Daniel opened the back door and stepped out first. Christy was behind him, wearing the expression I recognized from college, the one she used when she was trying to look vulnerable, head slightly tilted, hands loose at her sides. It was the expression she'd deployed when she wanted professors to extend deadlines, when she wanted bartenders to comp drinks. I had always found it charming. 14 years will do that to you. "Laura," she said, "please, can we talk like adults?" I looked at Daniel. He had the posture of a man who had practiced this, who had been the one to suggest the approach. Coming together, combined front, calibrated appeal to reason. I recognized his architect's instinct for structural planning even in this. "Sit down," I said. They sat across from me at the porch table. Christy began first because that had always been the strategy. Lead with the emotional argument, use warmth to disarm. She said that she was sorry. She said it in the particular way people say sorry when they mean, "I'm sorry you found out." And I noted the difference and said nothing. She said that what had happened was wrong. She knew that. She wasn't here to minimize it. She said that she and Daniel both felt terrible, that they had ended things, as though this were a scheduling conflict that had been resolved, and that what they both wanted, above everything, was for all of this to be handled privately, for the sake of everyone involved. "Going down this legal road," Daniel said, picking up where she left off with the smoothness of a rehearsed handoff, "is going to cost both of us. The house, the accounts, it gets divided up by people who don't know us and don't care about us. We can do better than that, Laura. You and I can sit down, decide what's fair." "What's fair?" I said. "And keep this between us. No public record, no attorney's fees draining what we built together." He paused. "You'd keep the house. We can work out the accounts. I just want this to be quiet," Christy finished. And there it was, under the condolences and the rehearsed sorrow, the actual ask. She wanted it quiet. She had a career, a reputation, a social circle that was largely our shared social circle. A public divorce citing adultery with her named as a party, and depending on how Patricia chose to proceed, she could be named, would be a different kind of cost. I looked at Christy across the table. I thought about 11 months. I thought about 2012 messages. I thought about Maison Blanc. I thought about the miscarriage and the hospital waiting room and the pin to my phone. "I hear everything you're saying," I said calmly, "and I want you both to hear me. I'm not interested in what's convenient for you." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Laura?" "I'm not finished." I didn't raise my voice. I had learned, somewhere in the past 6 weeks, that volume is not the same as authority. You both made a decision for 11 months, a daily, repeated, deliberate decision. Neither of you needs me to explain to you what that decision cost. What I need you to understand is that I am now making my own decisions, and they are not subject to your approval or your schedule. Christy leaned forward. "You're going to destroy everyone's lives over what?" I asked. She stopped. "Over what, Christy? Finish the sentence." She couldn't, because every possible way to finish that sentence was a confession. Daniel tried a different angle. He said that I was being driven by emotion, that I wasn't thinking clearly, that Patricia Elwood had a reputation for scorched earth tactics, and I was letting an attorney make decisions that would affect the rest of my life. It was almost impressive, the way he'd taken the language of concern and constructed a cage out of it. "I appreciate your input," I said. "This isn't you," he said, and his voice had dropped, gone soft in the way it used to when he wanted me to come back to something. "You're not like this. You don't operate from this place. Whatever she's been telling you." "Daniel," I said, "I think you should go inside." He stood. There was a moment, just a moment, when I thought he might say something else, something real, something that cracked through the performance. He didn't. He went inside. Christy stayed. She looked at me for a long moment, and I watched the warmth leave her face by degrees, replaced by something I recognized as her actual expression when she thought no one was watching. "You're making a mistake," she said, quietly, "without the performance." "Maybe," I said, "but it's mine to make." She left. I heard both car doors, and then the sound of Daniel's car backing out of the driveway. He had not come back inside. And then silence. I sat for a while on the porch. Biscuit put his head in my lap. I'll be honest, I was afraid. Not of what I was doing, but of how far people will go when they feel cornered. And I had just cornered two of them at once. They had resources. Daniel had connections at the courthouse. Christy had been strategically building goodwill in our social circle for months. I could see that now, understood what it was for. But I had something they didn't. I had done nothing wrong. And in a process designed to evaluate conduct, that is not a small thing. I scratched Biscuit behind his ears and went inside to call Patricia. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October. Patricia had requested depositions for both Daniel and Christy, the latter as a material witness in the adultery claim, which remained relevant to the asset distribution. Christy had hired her own attorney, a man named Brad Fowler, who had a reputation for aggressive maneuvering and had, Patricia told me without editorializing, sent 2 letters in the preceding weeks attempting to have Christy's deposition removed from scope entirely. Both motions had been denied. The conference room was on the 14th floor of Patricia's building, with a view of the city I did not look at. There was a long table, a court reporter, 2 attorneys on each side of the equation, and the particular quality of silence that settles in a room when everyone knows what is about to happen. I was not being deposed today. I was present as the plaintiff, silent beside Patricia. Daniel was first. He had hired a solid attorney, Michael Barnes, gray-haired, calm, the kind of attorney who specializes in making chaos look like a misunderstanding. Daniel came in looking composed. His suit was good. His handshake was steady. He sat down and placed his hands flat on the table in a way I recognized as deliberate, something he'd been coached on, a posture of open honesty. Patricia began with the financial questions, account transfers, cash withdrawals, the $19,000 over 11 months. Daniel had prepared for these. His answers were careful, measured, attributed to business expenses and a cash flow issue he'd discussed with his accountant. Patricia let him speak. She asked clarifying questions. She was pleasant, precise, and absolutely unhurried. Then she slid a document across the table. It was a printout of the credit card statement, his personal card, obtained through the discovery process, showing a purchase at the Hotel Biltmore on the 14th of March, the same night he had told me he was at a project dinner with clients. Patricia had cross-referenced his professional calendar, which had been disclosed. No client dinner was scheduled. His attorney said, "My client has already addressed the hotel expenditure in his written response." "I understand," Patricia said. "I'd like to hear him address it now." Daniel looked at the statement. His hands, I noticed, had come off the table. He said the hotel was for a personal matter he preferred not to discuss. Patricia said that she understood his preference, but that the nature of the expenditure was directly relevant to the claims in this proceeding. His attorney conferred with him in a whisper. Daniel said, "I was meeting someone." "Who?" Patricia asked. A pause. "A friend." "What is your friend's name?" Another pause. His attorney put a hand on his arm. "Kristen Marsh," Daniel said. The room was very still. Patricia moved to Exhibit 2, the hotel confirmation from the folder on the shared computer, the screenshot he had forwarded to himself, with his secondary email address visible in the header. She had, through the discovery process, confirmed that the secondary email account existed and that it had been used for communications Patricia described simply as personal in nature. His attorney objected to the characterization. Patricia withdrew the characterization and asked Daniel, plainly, whether the secondary email account was his. He said yes. And did you use that account to communicate with Kristen Marsh? A very long pause. Yes, he said. He looked then across the room at me, not at Patricia, at me, and I held his gaze and gave him nothing. No anger, no grief, no satisfaction. I had been in this room in my imagination for weeks, and every version of it I'd rehearsed had involved some feeling rising to the surface. None did. I was simply present, watching a man account for himself and finding his accounting insufficient. Christie's deposition was the afternoon session. She arrived with Brad Fowler, who was already visibly unhappy, and sat down with the posture of someone who had been coached within an inch of her life and was afraid of falling off the edge. She was dressed carefully, not too formally, not too casually. She had done her hair. She looked, objectively, like someone trying very hard to seem like someone who hadn't done anything wrong. Patricia began with the friendship. How long had she known Laura Haynes? When did she meet Daniel Haynes? How often did she see them, separately and together? Christie answered these questions with the warmth of someone describing a documentary about other people, careful and correct. Then Patricia asked when the romantic relationship with Daniel Haynes had begun. Brad Fowler objected. Patricia explained the relevance. The objection was noted and overruled. Christie said, "I don't think I'm comfortable characterizing." "When did you first communicate with Daniel Haynes outside the context of his relationship with Laura Haynes?" Patricia asked, redirecting. "They were my friends. I communicated with both of them." "Did you communicate with Daniel Haynes about your romantic feelings for him?" She stopped. "I communicated with him about a lot of things." "Did you meet Daniel Haynes at the Hotel Biltmore on the 14th of March of this year?" A silence. "I was in the area," she said. "Were you a registered guest at the Hotel Biltmore on that date?" Brad Fowler whispered something. "I may have been," she said. "Ms. Marsh, the hotel records obtained through subpoena show that a reservation was made in your name for that evening. Are these records inaccurate?" She looked at the document Patricia slid across the table. She looked at it for a long time. "No," she said. "They're not inaccurate." The rest of the deposition moved with the inevitability of something that has always been going to happen. By the end of it, Christie's carefully managed composure had developed visible cracks. She'd contradicted herself twice on dates. Her attorney had requested 3 recesses. And in a moment I will remember for a long time, she had looked at me across the room and said, with an abruptness that silenced everyone, "I never meant to hurt you." Patricia waited a beat, then said pleasantly, "Let the record reflect the witness made an unprompted statement. No further questions." I walked out of that building in the late afternoon light, Patricia beside me, and I felt the thing I had been waiting to feel for 5 months. Not triumph, not vindication, something quieter and more structural than either. The feeling of something that had been broken being correctly named. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in December, 4 days before Christmas. The settlement, as Patricia had navigated it, was comprehensive. I received the house outright. The court had recognized my documented contribution to the down payment, combined with Daniel's financial misconduct in attempting to move the $15,000 after the accounts were frozen, which Patricia had framed with considerable skill as evidence of bad faith. Daniel received his share of the investment accounts, minus a sum that accounted for the $19,000 Gerald Shue had traced through the discovery process. The court did not restore the full amount, but it reduced Daniel's share proportionally and awarded me the primary vehicle and the full contents of the house. The adultery finding was entered into the record. In Georgia, this did not mandate a specific financial penalty, but it carried weight in the distribution assessment, and it was, Patricia told me, the finding that had ultimately pushed Daniel's attorney towards settlement rather than litigation. No one wants to go to trial with an adultery finding on the record when the opposing party has hotel receipts, bank statements, and a deposition in which the respondent confirmed a secondary email account used for personal communications. Daniel signed the settlement agreement in Michael Barnes's office without me present. Patricia called me afterward and said, in her measured way, "It's done." I sat in my car in the parking garage of the credit union where my separate account had grown over the preceding months, and I cried for about 6 minutes. Then I drove home to my house. Biscuit met me at the door. The house felt different that evening. Not empty, though Daniel's things had been removed in stages over the preceding months, but clarified. Like a room after the furniture has been rearranged and you can see the light from the windows properly for the first time. I walked through it slowly, room by room, noting what was gone and what was mine. As for Christy, she had not been a party to the divorce settlement. She had no financial claim or liability in those proceedings, but the deposition record was not sealed. Patricia had seen no reason to request that it be. Christy's attorney had requested a protective order to seal the portion of the record containing her testimony. The judge had declined on the grounds that the testimony was directly relevant to contested claims. What that meant, in practical terms, was that the record existed, publicly, in a county where Christy worked and socialized and had built 14 years of reputation. I did not call anyone. I did not post anything. I did not send the record to mutual friends or her employer. I did not do any of the things I will admit I had, at moments during those months, imagined doing. I simply let the record be what it was, a public document, accessible to anyone who thought to look. I don't know exactly who looked or when. What I know is that by February, 3 of Christy's clients at the PR firm where she worked had quietly moved their accounts. By March, she had resigned. I learned this through Amanda, who had kept her ear to a particular frequency of the social network that I no longer had the energy for. Daniel left the state within 6 months. He had been offered a position at a firm in Charlotte, which may have been coincidence and may have been a quiet understanding that Atlanta had become professionally awkward. He sold his car. He sublet an apartment. He texted me once, in January, a message that said, "I hope you're okay." I did not respond. What I did, in those months, was simpler and more interior than any of the noise around me. I repainted the living room a color I had always wanted and Daniel had always vetoed, a deep, warm terracotta that made the evenings look like something out of a painting. I had Biscuit's portrait done by a local artist I found at a Saturday market. I started a garden in the backyard, which I had always said I didn't have time for, because it turned out what I hadn't had was the particular kind of quiet you need to grow things. I was, in small daily increments, building the life that had been waiting underneath the other one. Spring came the way springs do after hard winters, with a specificity that feels almost personal. By April, my house was mine in every sense that mattered. I had refinanced the mortgage in my name alone. I had repainted 3 rooms. I had torn out the kitchen backsplash Daniel had chosen without asking me and put in handmade ceramic tiles I'd been eyeing for 2 years. Uneven and warm, the kind that knows it was made by a person. At work, the Harmon project came in under budget and ahead of schedule. My firm gave me a lead role on a larger development project that would run through the following year. My boss, who knew a professional edited version of what I'd been through, had quietly put my name forward. Dr. Price and I continued meeting every other week, doing what she called reconstruction, building a relationship with myself that wasn't contingent on being someone's wife or someone's best friend. I had always been good at being what other people needed. I was learning to be curious about what I needed. In June, I met a man named Marcus at a book sale at the public library. We both reached for the same essay collection at the same moment. We laughed. We talked for 40 minutes in the stacks. He asked for my number. We had dinner twice before summer. He was kind in an uncomplicated, native way. We were taking things slowly, which suited me completely. As for Daniel and Christy, Daniel was in Charlotte in a junior position at a restructured firm, renting, not rebuilding much. Whatever he and Christy had been to each other had not survived the deposition. Christy was still in Atlanta at a smaller agency with a sparse social media presence that told its own story. Amanda had seen her once at a grocery store and said she looked tired in the way of someone managing something difficult alone. I did not feel triumphant. What had happened to them was the natural consequence of choices they had made. I had not destroyed them. I had simply declined to protect them from themselves. The garden in the backyard was doing well. Tomatoes, basil, a rose variety called Promise. I started leaving bags of tomatoes for my neighbor Frances, and we began having coffee on Tuesday mornings. She had been married 53 years. She said once, "You learn what things are actually made of when they get tested. Most things aren't made of much, but some things are." I thought about myself. The bathroom floor, the legal pad, Patricia's office, the deposition room, the terracotta walls, the garden, Marcus's laugh, Frances across the table on a Tuesday morning. More than I knew, I thought. I was made of more than I knew. If you recognize this feeling, find a good attorney, find one trusted person, write things down. What would you have done, setting that third place at the table? Leave a comment. Share this if someone needs it. Thank you for listening.